Part 172. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Zhu. Chapter 1711. Man Bao flipped out the booklet. Although the private school only occupies one class, but the teaching uses no less than 3 rooms, let's count it according to the 3 rooms. How much will it cost to build such 3 rooms next to the state prison? 20 students have to live in the department, at least 2 dormitories, and the most basic things like desks and chairs. Wang Ji couldn't help but said, these things are not only used once, but also for future students. No one can tell what will happen in the future, Man Bao said. What if our Imperial Physician Office will not recruit students from private schools next year? Ministers. But don't worry, we didn't include the entire cost of construction, but only a part of it. Since you said that these are fixed, let's calculate the loss of teaching materials. Man Baidao, let's talk about medicinal materials. There are more than 1,000 kinds in total. They need to recognize the medicinal materials when they study medicine, and these more than 1,000 kinds must be bought for them to identify. There are several states of the same medicinal material. The most basic, raw, and cooked, the latter is to be cooked. By the way, the raw materials for processing medicines also need processing materials. Firewood and other things are the most basic, not to mention valuable things such as wine. Man Bao continued to flip through the booklet and said, in addition to these, there are also knives and tweezers, scissors, needles, etc. Man Bao thought of something, looked up at them and said, do you know how valuable a good set of knives is? Xiao Yuan, who was on the side, interjected, Fan Tai's set of knives made by himself cost more than 60 taels. Officials, the set of knives in the hands of Imperial Physician Fan is also the only one among the doctors in the world. Why should the doctors in their family compete with Imperial Physician Fan? Man Bao seemed to know what they were thinking, and said faintly, if a woman needs a cesarean section, she needs a good set of knives. Officials, okay. Okay, there are still some bits and pieces, but I won't mention the items that cost a lot. Man Bao closed the booklet and said, why don't you count the cost of the 1,000 medicinal materials? That's the material of the entire Imperial Physician's Office, and we can't count all the expenses on the person we sent. Man Bao's face sank and said, Master Wang, you also said that you are not seeking personal gain. If it wasn't for His Majesty and the Ministry of Household providing some money, do you think you can buy these things with just your 100 taels? Have we discounted what we want to teach them? Did our Imperial Physician take the wages you paid? We take your Majesty and the salary from the Imperial Court, Man Bao said sharply, the 2 you handed in? Could it be that our Imperial Physician's Office and the East Palace are divided together? No, Man Bao shouted loudly, the whereabouts of the money has long been listed, and it is all used to train students in the Imperial Physician's Office, and the students of the Imperial Physician's Office are used to serve the country and your Majesty. If I don't teach you, our Imperial Physicians still get double stipends. To teach you, all the energy spent by our Imperial Physicians is willingly. What do you think we are doing? Xiao Yuanzhen knelt down to the ground and loudly responded with tears in his eyes, it's for His Majesty, for the people of the world, and for my great Jin. Your Majesty, the minister has been wronged, and the Imperial Physician's Office has been wronged. Man Bao also knelt down and shouted, Your Majesty, he still slandered our Imperial Physician's Office, and only for self-interest. Isn't the ability of so many Imperial Physicians in my Imperial Physician's Office worth even 100 taels? What's more, this money is not given to our Imperial Physicians, but to the common people of the world. I beg your Majesty to decide for our Imperial Physician's Office. Man Bao kowtowed, and then slightly tilted his head to look at Xiao Yuanzhen, who was kneeling on the left. 2 pairs of eyes, one big and one small, met each other and blinked at each other. Xiao Yuanzhen was very experienced, and he was really aggrieved. Out. Man Bao was anxious and blinked her eyes hard, but when she realized that she couldn't shed tears, she stared at Xiao Yuanzheng with wide eyes. Xiao Yuanzheng only had time to glance at her, then withdrew his gaze, raised his tearful face and wailed again, "I beg your majesty to call the shots for our imperial physician's office." Man Bao couldn't hold back his tears, so he could only straighten up from the ground and tilt his head to look at Wang Ji on the right with a confident face. "Before, I thought that the fees of the imperial physician's office were a bit high, and the officials who were a little resentful of the imperial physician's office suddenly felt embarrassed. Everyone thinks about it, Xiao Yuanzheng and the others are only responsible for teaching. Although they receive the money, if they don't embezzle, the money will definitely be used for the imperial physician's office. They did not benefit, but they had to teach 20 more students, but they received the same salary." Of course, most of the courtiers understood it and expressed their agreement. The people headed by Dong Gong naturally tried their best to stand on the side of Zhou Man and Xiao Yuanzheng, but when they were with Wang Ji and other 5 people, even if they understood in their hearts, they said it in their mouths. "Can't understand." Otherwise, the charge of a corpse meal today would be impossible to escape. This crime was not a light one. It was far more serious than Wang Ji's family turmoil, being unkind as an uncle, and stealing his nephew's property. It really fell, and that official didn't have to do it. There are a lot of people in the court who eat corpses, but they cannot be officially recognized, because on the bright side, His Majesty and the court do not need people who eat corpses. As a result, the two sides quarreled as soon as they collided. It's just that the people on Wang Ji's side were not prepared, while Guo Zhan's side was prepared 2 days earlier, so Dong Gong was slightly better with the numbers and materials that overwhelmed them. Wang Ji and the others were very popular, and the quarrel was not good. In the end, he pointed at Man Bao's nose and scolded, "Women are difficult to raise." It was the first time that Man Bao had come to the scene of a minister's quarrel, and she was so surprised when she heard Wang Ji scolding her. She replied, "You are so angry that you don't know how to be ashamed. Have I never eaten your rice? You. Instead, it was you, your mother gave birth to you to support you, provided you with education, married a wife and had children, but in the end it was said to you that a woman is difficult to support, so unfilial, and digging your majesty's corner, this is disloyal, you are disloyal and unfilial." Wang Ji opened his mouth to refute, but heard that Zhou Man continued without panting, "You still want to rob your eldest brother's son's property, this is not tiring, you still bully your nephew, your nephew was beaten to death, this is not merciful, you are not merciful. You. As an official, you don't have the heart to love the people, and you only want to take advantage of the country and the people. This is not benevolent. Xiao Yuan has been an official with you for more than 10 years, and you have the friendship of colleagues. In the end, you slandered Xiao for personal gain. The court is upright, because of injustice, you are not benevolent and injustice." The fingers that Wang Ji pointed at her trembled. Xiao Yuan, who was standing behind Man Bao, could see that the situation was not right, let alone facing his Man Bao. But Man Bao still read out the last sentence, "You are unfaithful, unfilial, unkind, unrighteous." Not to mention the emperor above, the entire court fell silent, staring at Zhou Man who kept talking. It's still very useful to have a duck's mouth for takeaway tonight. See you at 11 o'clock. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1712. Zhou Man speaks too fast, quarreling in the courtroom, basically whoever speaks faster and more reasonable will be more reasonable. For a long time, he didn't say a word. But at this time, he almost forgot what he was going to say. He just felt dizzy. Wang Ji didn't get up in one breath, and he was about to fall down in a flash, but Man Bao and Xiao Yuan, who had already been prepared, were stepping forward immediately. "Support him." Only then did Man Bao support the person, and he took out the silver needle he had prepared earlier in his hand and inserted it directly into the other person. The officials were a little surprised, and subconsciously wanted to call the imperial physician, but before they could say it, they remembered that there were 2 imperial physicians in the hall, so they swallowed the words again. But seeing Zhou Man stick such a long needle into it, all the officials couldn't help shaking, and Chi took a step back in fear. Man Bao quickly stabbed him with a few needles, and used the needle to pick his fingertips, releasing a few drops of black blood. Wang Jiyu woke up, and Man Bao sighed, "Master Wang, you have eaten too much meat, and your qi and blood are a little stagnant. In the future, you should eat less meat, use your gods less, and be less angry." The emperor, who stood up in shock, saw Wang Ji wake up and seemed to be all right, so he sighed in relief and sat back on the dragon chair. If his ministers really had something to do with the court, he would be to blame. The prince also sat back in his seat, sitting upright, quietly relieved. When Wang Ji opened his eyes and saw that Zhou Man was about to faint again, Xiao Yuanzhang pinched his mouth and said coldly, "Master Wang, you can't faint." Officials. The emperor couldn't help but coughed lightly, and finally spoke, "Okay, since Mr. Wang is unwell, let's go home and rest first. Come and take Mr. Wang back." When Wang Ji heard the words, his face turned gray and he was about to stand up after breaking Xiao Yuanzhen's hand, but Man Bao stretched out his hand and held it down. "Wait a minute, I'll pull out the needle, or it will be displaced in a while." Man Bao pulled out the 5 needles on his body, and let him go without pushing him. Wang Ji stumbled a little, but he still knelt on the ground and shouted, "Your Majesty, this minister has something to say." The emperor said, "What else does I King have to say?" The word justification shows the emperor's attitude. Wang Ji is not stupid. Although he was a little drowsy at this time, he could hear it. After thinking about it, he bowed his head and said, "Your Majesty, this minister has been an official for 18 years, and there is no merit or hard work. Does your Majesty really think that the minister is Zhou Man like that?" This is a tactic of underdogs, but it works well for the emperor. When Xiao Yuanzhang heard this, he sighed slightly. Wang Ji knew the emperor, and Xiao Yuanzhang, who often treated the emperor, naturally also knew the emperor. The emperor is the kind of person who is stronger when you are stronger, and who can't help pity when you are weak. Sure enough, the previously ruthless emperor sighed and said, "I King is unwell, go back to rest first." Wang Ji was sobbing and looked pitiful. Guozhenji frowned and couldn't help but want to speak, but when he saw the prince shaking his head slightly at him, he held it down and shook his head slightly to his own. So everyone kept silent, and Wang Ji stopped talking. After wiping away his tears, he let the guards help him out. Xiao Yuan was frowning tightly, and just when he felt that he was losing this wave, Man Bao had turned around and knelt down, and bowed generously, "Your Majesty forgives my sins, but I don't know how to restrain myself, and I'm angry with Lord Wang." As soon as the emperor heard this, he asked with a smile, "If you had known earlier, would you have restrained yourself?" After thinking about it seriously, Man Bao said, "Those ministers can still speak, but they should be more euphemistic." She sighed like an adult, "It's a pity, but this is a court. Everything should be based on the people of the world, the country, and the interests of your Majesty. Although I feel sorry for Lord Wang, I don't regret it." As soon as the emperor heard it, he sighed at the civil and military officials of the Manchu dynasty below. A 14-year-old child knows the truth, but the ministers have forgotten it. As soon as these words came out, whether it was the prince, Weiji, and others who were still sitting, or several courtiers who were standing in the queue, they all knelt down and admitted their mistakes. "I am ashamed of the ministers." The emperor waved his hand, and his soft heart hardened again at this time, and he directly ordered, "The case of Zhou Man's impeachment shall be investigated by the censor and the Ministry of Personnel. The scorpion is on the side." Kneeling Liang Fei and the others slid cold sweat from their foreheads, anxious in their hearts, but did not dare to defend at this time. The emperor got up, threw his sleeves and left. Gu Zhong immediately shouted loudly, "Retreat, Chao Dash." When Man Bao heard this, he wanted to stand up, but was grabbed by Xiao Yuanzhang, and he honestly knelt on the ground. Gu Zhong lowered his eyes and glanced at Zhou Man, who almost fell, pretending he couldn't see it, and turned around to chase after the emperor after shouting. It wasn't until the person kneeling in front of them got up that Xiao Yuanzhang let go of her sleeve and let her get up. Man Bao touched his forehead and found that she was sweating even on such a cold day. She bent down and picked up the documents on the ground, and seeing Xiao Yuan standing unwilling to move, she wondered, "Do you want me to hold it all?" Xiao Yuanzhang glanced at her and said in a low voice, "Don't talk, my hands and feet are a little weak now and I don't want to talk." Man Bao, she is the one who is arguing, why does he have to be soft-hearted? She can only stand honestly, and by the way, respectfully let the officials who are higher than her, or those who are older than her leave the temple first. Well, in this way, she seems to be staying until the end. Man Bao sighed while holding the booklet in his arms. Old Master Tang came over, looked her up and down and smiled, "It's a pity that you are a woman, otherwise you would be more suitable for the censor's desk than an old man like me." Wei Ji also came over. He was more generous, and directly reached out and patted Man Bao on the shoulder. Although he didn't speak, his eyes showed admiration and his attitude was clear. The ministers had already left the hall first. No matter what they were thinking, at least they nodded to her when they passed by Zhou Man. Most of the minor officials just turned around and left the hall. There was no way. Zhou Man and the others were kneeling in front of them. They couldn't even pass by her. Yang Heshu and Tang He originally wanted to go forward, but seeing that the prince in front was still sitting, they thought about it and nodded with Zhou Man, who was looking over, then turned and left. When the people were almost gone, the prince got up and left the palace. When he passed by the two, he raised his chin slightly and said to Eunuch Wu, who was catching up, "Help Xiao Yuan hold something." Eunuch Wu hurried to hold the information on the ground. Xiao Yuan was smiling bitterly, raised his hand and said, "Let your highness see the joke." The crown prince smiled and said, "2/3 of the book is alone, what kind of joke are you watching?" After saying that, he raised his feet and walked away. Man Bao looked at Xiao Yuanzhang with concern. Xiao Yuanzhang gave her a warning glance, and then went out with her, but he walked a little slowly. But the prince walked very fast. Eunuch Wu couldn't help being a little anxious, neither following the prince nor following Xiao Yuanzhang. Man Bao gave Eunuch Wu a wink. Eunuch Wu breathed a sigh of relief, and hurriedly went after the prince with something. Man Bao and Xiao Yuanzhang were left behind. See you tomorrow. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1713. When the prince turned the corner, Xiao Yuanzhang walked more slowly, directly reaching out to cover his lower back. Man Bao was amazed to see it. "Aren't you tense and weak? Did you hurt your waist?" "It's not because of you, the prince and the adults are still kneeling." "What are you doing when you get up? You are still so energetic, I accidentally twisted to stop you." Man Bao immediately put down the thing and wanted to press it for him. Xiao Yuanzhang looked left and right, and seeing no one, he leaned on the railing and pressed it for her, hissing, "It's just that you don't have a cramp, it's not very serious. You press a button, yes, just this position, use a little force." Man Bao pressed the button and asked, "I think Wang Ji is really angry, the hospital is right, should we send an imperial physician to his house?" Xiao Yuanzhang felt that the child was too worried, and said, "Send the imperial doctor over, he will be out of anger even if he is not sick, and he will not be able to tell at that time. If he is not feeling well, he will go to the doctor. Man Bao thought for a while and said, but I'm afraid he won't hire a doctor. She said, although we are courtiers, we do have to fight against wicked people like Wang Ji, but we are also doctors. Since we know that he is ill, he is not unable to pay for the diagnosis anyway, so let someone see him. Let's heal people. Xiao Yuanzheng understood a little, and turned around to look at her in surprise. Seeing her serious face, he asked curiously, don't you hate Wang Ji? Man Bao was inexplicable, what do I hate him for? He impeached you. I've also impeached him, Man Bao said indifferently, I'm an official, don't you want to impeach something you don't like? But I really don't like him, I think he's too narrow-minded. And he values self-interest, but that's a human problem. I've already said that he's not fit to be an official, and I've shown my attitude. Xiao Yuanzheng, so you're arguing with people so that you don't hate people. Man Bao wondered, why should I hate him? There are no good words in the quarrel, and he attacked me first, otherwise I would just think about those words in my mind, but I wouldn't say them. He insulted me like this, and I naturally wanted to fight back. And he is really not suitable to be an official, and in the position of the censor, he can only eat corpses, and he doesn't know how many people he will kill. Xiao Yuanzheng was helpless, he will lose his position because of you, but you don't hate him, but I think he must hate you to death. Man Bao sighed and said, it's also him who is sad. Anger hurts the liver, sadness hurts the lungs, and fear hurts the kidneys. Having said that, Man Bao looked at Xiao Yuanzheng, and thought to comfort him in a subtle way, Xiao Yuanzheng, your waist is not very good, don't be too afraid when you encounter this kind of thing in the future. Just resign and go back. We have the ability, are we afraid that we will not be able to conquer the world? Xiao Yuan was angry, nonsense, who said my kidneys are not good? Man Bao pressed his waist and said nothing. Xiao Yuan was about to speak, but he was afraid that he would make more mistakes, so he could only hold his breath and not speak. After a while, his waist eased, and he patted Zhou Man's hand and said, okay. Seeing him unloading the mill and killing the donkey, Man Bao could only sigh. She picked up the documents again and followed Xiao Yuanzheng back to the Chongguan Museum. Halfway through, Xiao Yuanzheng said, you have to be really worried, I will see Imperial Physician Zheng and ask the doctor from Ji Shitang to run. Man Bao is also planning whether to let Dr. Ding go to the Wang family for a turn, but she has no experience in being an official and is afraid that she will make a taboo. Seeing Xiao Yuanzheng say this, Man Bao was relieved and said happily, I knew Xiao Yuanzheng was a doctor with the same kindness as me. Xiao Yuanzheng saw that she had nothing to worry about, and she couldn't help smiling because of her carefree appearance. She shook her head slightly and said, who is so cheeky and boastful like you? Xiao Yuan was returning to the Chongguan Museum with a sigh, but he did not stay there for a long time. Instead, he brought most of the materials on the table back to the Tai hospital. Dr. Lu was busy behind him, why can't these things be placed in the Chongguan Museum? Xiao Yuanzheng sighed and said, let's not say that the old Wang family is all over the court and the opposition, let's just say that this time, our Taiyuan hospital has been forced to be on the side of the Crown Prince, and it is not good to put things in Chongguan Hall, but it is better to keep it in Taiyuan Hospital for safety. The Imperial Physician's office was originally hosted by the East Palace. Isn't it reasonable for us to get closer to His Royal Highness? Xiao Yuanzheng shook his head slightly and said, we think it is reasonable, but other people in the court may not see it this way. So what should be done is still to be done, no matter what outsiders think, at least this impression cannot be left behind by His Majesty. Imperial Physician Lu understood that they were imperial physicians and could only obey the emperor. Imperial Physician Lu thought for a while and then said, let's just pay it back, where Imperial Physician Zhou. Thinking of Zhou Man, Xiao Yuanzheng shook his head slightly, and said with admiration and relief, "That child is stronger than everyone in our hospital combined, her character and talent, don't worry, she will leave in the future. Farther than all of us." When Zhou Man first arrived at the Thai hospital, Xiao Yuanzheng was still a little alienated and wary of her. After all, the other party was too young and she was a girl, but after getting along for a few months, even the mature Xiao Yuanzheng had to admit that, she also has a pure heart and is extremely talented in medicine. She is different from us, we started reading and literacy from the Materia Medica, but she started from the 1,000 characters like the scholars. After passing through the collections of classics and history such as the Great Learning and the Doctrine of the Mean, she is far superior to us in terms of knowledge. Xiao Yuanzheng could never forget that she stood in front of the case and gave them a list of data showing the importance of the existence of the Imperial Physician's Office. She just inquired from Ji Shitang and figured out that there are at most 5 doctors in a lower county, including barefoot doctors and Yufang Langzhong in the countryside. A middle county can have no more than 10 doctors at most, and upper counties are more, but for the benefit in Zhoucheng, for example, there are only 20 doctors. And how many people are there in a county? Dajin is very short of doctors, but they have never thought about this before, let alone count the number of medicinal fields that need to be planted after the establishment of the medical department, and the medicinal farmers who can support this. But she counted everything clearly, one by one. Just like the adults in the Ministry of Housing. But she is only 14 years old, her life is still very long, she can do many, many things. Thinking of how she dared to stand among the 100 officials and quarrel with Wang Ji this morning, how could Xiao Yuanzheng still worry about her? What should be worried about is whether he is okay. She will be able to go very far in the future. Old Master Tang also thought so, and he did not hesitate to praise Zhou Man, and directly told Wei, Master Wei's eyesight has finally improved. Not long ago, the censor station just found out a corrupt official, who was recommended by Wei Ji 8 years ago. The emperor said on the spot that Wei Ji had bad eyesight. Wei Ji. After luck, he said, there's another one. When Bai Shan goes into office, you will praise me again. Old Master Tang smiled and shook his head. See you at 4 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1714. The atmosphere in Master Tang and Master Yang was more lively. Tang He was going to the palace gate and talking to Yang Heshu at the same time. He couldn't hold back his smile and said, she is smart and knows that retreat is the way to advance. Yang Heshu nodded slightly and said, Wang Ji, Liang Fei and the others may not be able to escape this time, and the best outcome is to be dismissed from office. Tang He rolled his eyes and said, I remember that Liang Fei was in the punishment department. Yang Heshu said directly, don't think about it, you just became the magistrate of Chang'an County, and it is impossible to change within 3 years. Tang He was very sorry. Yesterday, there was another fight on the street. There are not many big cases. It's all about the children of the powerful and the bullshit. It's not as comfortable as being a county magistrate in Yizhu. Yang Heshu smiled, it was easier than walking between the Ministry of Housing and the East Palace. Tang He also felt that he was slightly luckier than Yang Heshu. He thought of something and said with a smile, I think she will also go to the Great Court in the future. Twice a month, go up and go. Man Bao had just returned to the Chongguan pavilion and sat down not long before he was called to Kong Jiju. Kong Jiju said, Guozhenshi said that from now on, you will be present at all the great ceremonies in the dynasty. Man Bao was a little nervous, am I going to the main hall at Chenxi in the future? That's right, Kong Jiju didn't care about such trivial matters at first, but thinking that she had a precedent for being late, and that she was still young, it was when she was dozing off, so she said, so in order not to rush into the hall, the general officials would queued up before and after Majeng to enter the palace. Man Bao calculated the time, and felt bitter in his heart, is the great court meeting twice a month? It's the norm, but there are exceptions. Kong Jiju waved his hand indifferently. The Ministry of Personnel will naturally inform you at that time. Okay, you can go down. Man Bao turned around and left. It was just about lunchtime, so she couldn't help but say to Bai Shan, if you encounter a big court meeting in the future, you have to help me get things. Bai Shan said there was no problem, and asked curiously, why did you scold Wang Ji when you were facing up today? Many classmates whispered behind our backs, and ran away when they saw us going up. Bai Erlang concluded, they must not say good things about you, only when they say bad things will they carry people behind their backs. Man Bao didn't care, and said, anyway, Xiao Yuan is complimenting me, and the Crown Prince didn't say I did anything wrong. I listen, His Majesty also likes me, so I should have won all round. Since I won, I don't care what other people say about me. However, when the group went to Bai Shan's room to have tea and snacks after dinner and rest, she still recounted the events of today's court meeting vividly. Several people listened with relish. Bai Erlang's eyes brightened and said, this is not much worse than our original complaint, it should be written down. Man Bao said, what do you do when you write it down? Anyway, write it down first, you don't know. After I finish writing the biography of the elder brother, I will stop writing. The owners of the bookstores will send me letters when they can, and let me think about new stories quickly. Make up a story to Big Brother. Brother Xiang has a good temper, but we can't always catch him and write. Last time he was stopped by two people when he went out, and they had to invite him to eat and drink, which scared him to go out with Brother Thursday the next day. Yin he said, I may have not seen Big Brother Xiang for a long time. Lu Huan said, the last time we ate together was last month, and I still miss him. Man Bao and Bai Shan. Man Bao quickly changed the subject and said to Bai Erlang, you can write if you want, but you have to write me better. Bai Erlang patted his chest and said, don't you worry about me. Don't worry, I will definitely write well. They are carefree, but the DPRK is surging. The censor office and the Ministry of Personnel acted together, not only to check the appraisal achievements of Wang Ji and several others over the years, but also to investigate deeper. For example, dealing with other officials, income and expenditure and other things, although these things are complicated, they can best see the essence. Who they are, as long as they go deep, most of them can't hide. In the past, the Crown Prince had been puzzled for a long time, and Wang Ji and others had not less targeted him. At first, he thought that he was just like Wei Ji, a stinky and hard rock. Later, there were too many trivial things to find fault with, and he slowly figured it out, thinking he was the third child. As a result, after Prince Gong was placed under house arrest, he still shared his worries for the emperor, that is, he was worried about the future of the country, and he was worried about the appearance of handing over the capital to the prince, and the prince knew that he was not from Prince Gong. In the past, I wanted to investigate but couldn't do it, but this time I could do an open and honest investigation. The prince naturally wanted to instruct him to investigate further. In fact, there is no need for him to hint, the emperor personally ordered and personally interrogated. Even if someone wanted to fool the past, he would not dare to move too much. What's more, the censor's desk is still hosted by the old Tang Lord. After 3 days of investigation, Wang Ji fell ill and had to submit a resignation letter. If the Great Court only stopped when he was crying and leaving, then it would be no problem for him to resign, and the emperor would let him leave if he turned a blind eye. But that day Zhou Man also confessed his mistakes and pleaded guilty, and the emperor had to admit that Zhou Man was right. If an official cannot serve the people, the country, or the ruler of his country, then he will be a minister in vain. So the emperor suppressed his book, did not agree, and continued to let the censor and the ministry of officials investigate. Seeing that 7 days have passed, Manbao will leave the palace in 2 days, and before the result of this matter, Manbao ran to ask Xiao Yuan Zheng, Do you want me to come and see him? Xiao Yuanzheng doesn't go to Chongqing Museum very often now. Even if he is cultivating books, he usually borrows books back to Taiyuan Hospital to compile them, which is a lot of trouble, but at least he can put aside a little relationship with Donggong. Seeing Zhou Man wandering around with a medicine box, he lifted his eyelids to take a look and asked, "Who are you looking at?" "Lord Wang," Man Bao said, "I heard Brother Yang say that he has been ill since he left the palace. It is rumored that he even vomited blood, and it is said that he was angry with me." Man Bao still had a little guilt on his face, scratched his face and said, "If my parents knew that I had made people sick, they would definitely ask me to come and admit my mistake. I don't think I would admit my mistake, but you can come and have a look. His illness is a big deal, and I don't need his family's medical expenses." Physicians. Xiao Yuanzheng was also speechless, and then said, "Don't be naughty, if you go, the rumor of vomiting blood will become a fact. The fake is just clarified, otherwise it will be very bad for my reputation." Xiao Yuanzheng comforted her and said, "It's okay, don't look at this from the point of view of an imperial physician, you just think that you are compiling, you have to think about it. When the officials in the court spoke and cursed, they didn't. Don't be offended, it's a common thing, don't feel guilty." Man Bao sighed inwardly. Not only was she guilty, but she was also afraid that her parents would find out and beat her. When they were in the village, they never let their children quarrel with adults, thinking it was very uneducated. See you at 9. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1715. Man Bao is not very confident to go back to the Chongqing Museum. She took the medicine box back to the house and left it for dinner. They had a rest the next day, and Bai Shan and the others tidied up the desks and brought home some schoolwork and books, so they hadn't reached the cafeteria yet. Man Bao sat down in the position they used to do, and Tate, the older students who rarely attended classes, walked past her and greeted her. Man Bao also raised his hand in return. It had been 7 days, and she was used to it. Since her big court meeting, they have especially liked to pass her by and say hello. Man Bao is bored. There is no way, she is only one person, they only need to give one salute, but there are more than 10 of them, one by one, she will have to return more than 10 salutes, okay. Fortunately, this time they came in together, a group of 3 or 2, Man Bao returned 3 or 4 salutes and it was over, and she sat down on the chair again. Suyu and others brought food boxes over. Just after the meal was put down, Bai Shan and the others came in together. Bai Shan exhaled and said, "I'm really hungry." Bai Erlang nodded again and again. Seeing that they seemed to be sweating, Man Bao asked, "What are you doing?" "Let's go to the riding and archery class," Bai Shan said. "We were riding and shooting at 11 Niiwen this afternoon, and Lord Yin happened to be here, so Master Wu divided us into 2 teams to play polo, except for Zhao Lu. I'm not very good at fighting with Big Brother Feng, and I sweat after running around." Bai Erlang pointed to the outside and said, "Look, we were sweating on such a cold day. You can imagine how tired we are." Among the few people, only Yin, or Clean, not in a hurry, because he didn't come off at all. He didn't even do the basic action of drawing a bow, so he rode his horse for 2 laps, and then disliked his butt and got off the horse. "Sit aside and rest." Bai Shan pointed at Lu Huan, who was even more embarrassed, and said with a smile, "Bai and I are hillbillies and have never played polo. You grew up in the capital, and you have learned it, how can you not?" "I will," Lu Huan emphasized, "I just haven't played for too long, so I just lost my level. Just wait, I'll show you how good I am next time." Don't talk about Bai Shan and Bai even Yin, or don't believe it. Man Bao listened with relish and said, "I want to fight too." Feng Zonping, who was sitting on the table next to him, heard it and sat down and said, "This is simple. Let's go to Zijiao racecourse to play polo tomorrow. Do you want to go? The teenagers were all excited. Bai Shan turned his head and glanced at the sky outside, and said, "It's been a little groggy these 2 days, I'm afraid it will snow." "What are you afraid of? Let's wait until it's down," Feng Zhongping said with a smile. "If it really snows, we'll go hunting. If we can catch a deer, it's good to roast venison." Man Bao let out an ah and said expectantly, "Roast venison and enjoy the snow." Feng Zhongping said, "How about it? Let's go, let's go. It's been so long since you've been in the capital. You haven't eaten roast venison at the horse farm in the western suburbs, have you?" "Really not. At this time last year, not long after the death of King Yizhu, they were still a little scared. How dare they go to such a dangerous place?" Seeing that Man Bao really wanted to go, Bai Shan nodded and said, "Okay, then let's go. Speaking of which, if it snows, this will be the first snow in the capital." "Man Bao, the snow is a good year. This year, the Jiangyi region is dry. It doesn't snow after the light snow. If it does snow, I just hope that the snow will be a little bigger, at least to ease the drought." Yin or his fingers figured it out, and said, "Is there a heavy snow in the day after tomorrow? Maybe it will really snow." After everyone had eaten, Man Bao was not in a hurry to go back. It was still early anyway, so a group of people moved to the attic to sit, chatting and eating while waiting for the time to pass. The sky was getting darker, and Man Bao was a little sleepy. She had to go back to wash up, and then she had to go to the classroom to have a class with teacher Mo. As soon as she got up, Suyu ran over to the yard where the two servants lived, and when she got downstairs, she shouted, "Dr. Zhou, the crown princess is going to give birth." Man Bao's sleepiness dissipated instantly. She and Bai Shan looked at each other, and immediately went downstairs. Bai Shan hurried downstairs behind her and asked, "Do you want me to accompany you there?" "No need, you're not a doctor, it's useless to go over." Bai Shan went downstairs and asked, "Didn't you just visit her this morning? Did you suddenly have to give birth because of a problem? The due date is this time." "It's normal for a few days early and a few days later," Man Bao said quickly, "it should be fine." But as soon as the waiter at the bottom saw Zhou Man, he said, "The imperial Dr. Zhou, let's go, the empress is terrified. At this time, the abdominal pain is not stopping, and she is screaming badly." When Bai Shan heard this, he immediately said, "I'll go with you. It is said that production is a gate of hell, and the prince has a bad temper. What if Man Bao is bullied?" Before Man Bao could speak, Suyu handed her the medicine box in his hand, and said meekly, "Dr. Zhou, this is your medicine box, which the servant brought from your room." Man Bao took it and wanted to refuse again, but Bai Shan had already taken her hand and strode towards the West Mansion, saying, "Let's go quickly, don't keep your highness and the empress waiting for a long time." Bai Erlang also ran after him, and asked loudly, "Then, what should I do?" Bai Shan took time to reply, "Go back to sleep. If you are afraid, go to sleep with Yin or them at night. If we haven't come back tomorrow morning, you will go out of the palace to report safety." Before he finished speaking, the man had already trotted out of the courtyard and into the corridor. Bai Shan wanted to bring her the medicine box. Man Bao didn't refuse, but he didn't let go. The heavy medicine box became a lot lighter in an instant, and their speed became faster. The group trotted to the West Mansion, and when they got to the backyard, they saw that the courtyard was quiet. Man Bao was so curious that he reached out and grabbed a maid who was carrying a pot of hot water and asked, "How is the crown princess?" The palace maid said, "Prince Concubine is in the house, and Imperial Dr. Zhou will know when he goes in and sees it." Man Bao went in with the medicine box. Bai Shan couldn't follow him, so he could only stand in the yard and wait. Man Bao ran in a hurry. Not only was she panting, her forehead was sweating. She hurried into the room, only to see that the crown princess was sitting on the couch with a bowl of sugar water to drink, and the crown prince was sitting in front of the couch. Her forehead seemed to be slightly sweat. The crown prince and crown princess heard the movement and immediately turned around to look. Seeing Man Bao's eyes lit up, they all breathed a sigh of relief and immediately waved, "Come here." Man Bao paused for a while and then stepped forward with an inexplicable expression, "Didn't you say that the empress is going to give birth?" The crown princess was a little embarrassed, and whispered, "The pain was terrible just now. I thought it was because the amniotic fluid broke, and I was about to give birth, but the pain eased after a while, and it still hurts now, but not so much." "Suffering," she said, when said that she is about to give birth, but it is not so fast. It may take a night. Man Bao. See you at 10 p.m. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1716. The crown princess looked at Man Bao eagerly, stretched out her wrist and said, "Man Bao, would you like to check my pulse?" The pulse is naturally to be seen. Man Bao put down the medicine box, took out the pulse pillow, reached out to touch the pulse of the crown princess, and then reached out to touch her stomach, and said, "It shouldn't be born tonight, but it will hurt." As soon as the voice fell, the crown princess uttered "ouch," holding her stomach so much that she was speechless for a moment. Man Bao could only massage the acupuncture points for her to make her less painful. After a while, the crown princess regained her breath. She took a few quick breaths and cried, "Is it so painful to give birth?" Man Bao nodded, "Yes, it is said in medical books that the pain of childbirth is the most painful in the world, so crown princess, you must preserve your physical strength." Man Bao gently persuaded, "You may not sleep well this night, but you have to sleep too. Now you get out of bed and walk around. You can fall asleep when you are tired." The princess asked, "Is there any other way to relieve the pain? I heard that you gave Han Wunyang pain relief when she delivered her baby. It was a cesarean section, and the whole person needs to pass out. The crown princess wants to give birth naturally, so she definitely can't do that." Man Bao thought for a while, "But you can try acupuncture, but it's just to relieve some pain, it is impossible to achieve complete pain relief." The crown princess expressed her understanding, and looked at Man Bao eagerly, waiting for her to get the needle. Man Bao said silently, "You are only in labor pains now, you don't need this, you should wait until the official production time." Seeing the crown prince's bitter face, Man Bao explained, "Labor pain is also for you to feel and adapt to this pain early, otherwise you will not be able to bear the sudden pain during childbirth. A person's ability to endure pain will grow." The crown princess didn't know if she accepted her words. Anyway, she no longer asked Man Bao to puncture her now. Man Bao breathed a sigh of relief, looked at the dark sky outside and said, "Then I'll go back tonight." The crown princess immediately reached out and grabbed Man Bao, then looked at the crown prince. The prince got up and said, "You don't have to go back tonight, just stay here and watch the princess." The voice just fell from here, and Eunuch Wu's voice sounded outside, "His Royal Highness, Imperial Physician Lu and Imperial Physician Zheng from the Imperial Hospital are here." The two imperial physicians were also invited by the Eastern Palace. Neither the prince nor the princess had any experience in giving birth, so she thought she was going to give birth immediately after a while, so she sent someone to invite Zhou Man, and at the same time she sent someone to the Thai hospital. When the nearest wife, Wen, came to check and comfort the princess, Man Bao also arrived. The prince thought for a while, then simply said, "Leave the two imperial physicians as well. Come on, clean up the side hall for them to live in." "Wait a minute," Man Bao asked, "shouldn't the side hall be cleaned up and used as a delivery room?" The prince and the princess didn't speak. The maid on the side explained in a low voice, "The prince is not very familiar with the side hall." After living in, she always felt flustered, so she decided to give birth in the main hall. As soon as Man Bao heard this, she immediately looked into the inner room. She couldn't see anything through the screen, so she got up. Then we have to clean up again. Have you cleaned up? The big palace maid immediately said, I have just cleaned up according to your and the mother's instructions, you can go and have a look. The tent in the inner room was rolled up, and the bed above was changed to a clean and simple one. Man Bao stepped forward to touch it, and smelled it again. The big palace maid said in a low voice, the ladies have all checked and found nothing more. Man Bao nodded, turned out of the inner room and looked at the prince and the prince concubine. Do I really want to stay here tonight? She said, actually, Chongguan Museum is not very far from here, it's all in the East Palace. The prince frowned, how did you push the 3 and block the 4? Man Bao said, Bai Shan is still waiting for me outside, and after resting, I will have energy tomorrow when I actually give birth, right? The prince was speechless. You see a doctor, what is he doing with a Kongwengan student? Man Bao paused and said, he is worried about His Royal Highness. The prince scoffed, whether he was worried about him or Zhou Man, he was not a fool. The prince got up and said, just stay with the princess. As for Bai Shan, let him and Imperial Physician Lu and the others accompany him. The stable mothers have been staring at the side, and it is not easy for the crown prince to stay for too long. He said to the crown prince, if you are in pain, say it. Keep. The crown princess was indeed more relieved when she heard the words, and nodded again and again, I know, go down. The prince nodded to Zhou Man and turned to go out. As soon as he left, Granny Wen and aunts breathed a sigh of relief. Generally, men are not allowed in the delivery room, but the prince has a big temper. They just gave him a glare after persuading them before, so they didn't dare to persuade them anymore. As soon as the prince went out, Man Bao immediately took off his shoes and sat on the couch to talk to the princess. You are so nervous, didn't you have a rehearsal of how you were going to give birth? According to Mr. Mo, when they were still pregnant a long time ago, pregnant women would conduct production training and explain various knowledge before giving birth, so that mothers could be as aware as possible during delivery and would not panic too much. Man Bao has been coming to see the princess almost every day since she was pregnant. Between the two, the princess has taught her to play several songs. And Man Bao also taught her a lot about maternal medical theory, from correcting the fetal position to giving birth rehearsal, they have done it all. The crown princess smiled bitterly and said, I felt that I was fine before, but I really didn't expect it to hurt so much. When I started to feel pain, I couldn't remember anything. If Granny Wen hadn't come to appease her, she would have panicked even more. Hearing this, Man Bao could only sigh, stretched out his hand and touched her big belly and said, forget it, since you forget it as soon as it hurts, it's useless to hug Buddha's feet temporarily, anyway, just remember, no matter how painful it is, just listen to us. The woman on the side nodded again and again. The crown princess has no experience, but they have. Basically, if the mother listens to them, the delivery is half successful. The princess nodded again and again. Man Bao looked at the time and said to the crown princess, go to sleep while your stomach doesn't make a fuss. Don't worry, I'm in this courtyard and won't go back. For a year, especially in the past 10 months, the two of them have been together almost day and night. The crown princess has already developed a feeling of dependence on her. She said this, the crown princess felt relieved and supported the palace maid's hand back to the inner room to sleep. Before leaving, he also instructed the maid of the palace, pick up this soft couch and let Imperial Dr. Zhou sleep. The wife Wen and the aunts and maids on the side were envious. It was a great honor to be able to sleep on the couch in the main room of the East Palace. But Man Bao obviously didn't think of this. After the princess fell asleep, she ran out to find Bai Shan, and of course, took the medicine box that she had been reluctant to look away from. See you tomorrow. By the way, I haven't told you all that. After discussing with the editor, a new book was published on the sideline of the second generation of rich cultivation. From the moment Lin Qingguan, Yi Han, and others soared, the new book was called Daily Life. Since ascension in modern times, because it needs to be updated according to the editor's requirements, the content of the updated chapters is still the previously updated episode, but for the sake of good connection and to avoid sensitive content, it has been modified a little. For example, the special department has been changed to the management department. Anyway, it is still thin. You can save it first if you are not in a hurry, but remember to collect it, because the collection data is very important. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1717. After Man Bao left the main room, he turned around and went to the side hall. Imperial Physician Lu and Imperial Physician Zheng were talking to Bai Shan, and the three decided to make do with it in the side hall tonight. As soon as Man Bao came over, Imperial Physician Lu asked, "Is the Crown Princess okay?" "It's okay, it's just pain." Imperial Physician Lu had guessed it long ago, so he wasn't nervous at all. He asked, "Just at the beginning?" Man Bao nodded. Imperial Physician Lu sighed, "Then there is still more to wait, and you may not be able to give birth tomorrow." He turned his head to look at Bai Shan, raised his eyebrows and asked, "Is young Master Bai still staying in the East Palace?" Bai Shan smiled and said, "I will rest tomorrow. I have nothing to do anyway. It's not very convenient to enter or leave the East Palace now, so I'll leave it here." Imperial Physician Lu glanced at Zhou Man, shook his head and said nothing. Seeing that the palace servants had already covered the bed with quilts, Imperial Physician Zheng took off his shoes and sat on the bed. "It's getting colder and colder, let's go to bed quickly. If the princess starts tomorrow, I'm afraid there will be no rest." "Work done." Man Bao glanced at him and said, "You don't need to enter the delivery room, can I be tired no matter how tired you are?" "Dr. Zheng, so why don't you go to rest, what are you doing here?" "Of course, he came to see Bai Shan." Imperial Physician Lu coughed lightly and interrupted them, "I have listed 2 emergency prescriptions, let's see if there is any problem." He said, "It may not be necessary, but it is best to prepare the medicinal materials. In this way, if something happens, it can be caught and boiled, and the speed is fast. Sometimes it is time to save people, and a few breaths may bring people back from the hands of Lord Yama." Man Bao looked at it carefully, handed it to Imperial Physician Zheng, and said, "I have no opinion." Zheng Imperial Doctor also read it again, "The formula is good, so he has no opinion." Seeing that they agreed, Imperial Physician Lu nodded, pulled the screen over to block the bed, and sighed, "Okay, young Master Bai can sleep on the couch when he is young, and we both sleep on the bed. Don't you?" "It's too late to speak." Bai Shan responded and didn't disturb them in the room. He pulled Man Bao out, and the two stood under the porch talking. Seeing that she was still carrying a medicine box with her, she asked in a low voice, "Why, are you still worried about someone touching your medicine box in the East Palace?" Man Bao said, "It's not a big mistake to be careful. Think about how many things have happened from last year to now because the prince has no children. Now that the prince is about to give birth, you have to be more careful." Bai Shan sat on the railing, patted his side and let her sit down. Fortunately, there was no wind at the moment, and although it was colder at night, their clothes were thick enough. Bai Shan stretched out his hand to hold hers, his 2 hands clasped hers together, and it warmed instantly. Full of joy, Bai Shan asked in a low voice, "Can the crown princess give birth safely?" Man Bao whispered, "No one dares to be 100% sure about this kind of thing, but the crown princess's fetus is in the right position, and the fetus is well raised, not small, but not particularly big, and her body is not bad. It's not too small, it should be fine." In fact, Man Bao herself was also a little nervous. she whispered. However, the doctor treats the disease, not the life. Sometimes, no matter where it is, there are still accidents in the production. What we need to do now is to prevent accidents. Mothers are most afraid of abnormal fetal position and heavy bleeding. The former can be ruled out. The latter, acupuncture, can not only relieve pain, but also stop bleeding. I will always pay attention. She opened the box, took out her needle bag and looked at it. Seeing that she was looking at the needle bag, Bai Shan asked, "What's wrong?" Man Bao lowered his voice and said, "Isn't my needle bag moved last time? Then I got used to it. I don't need the needle bag in this box, I use the one I carry on my body." Man Bao touched her sleeve. In fact, she took out her usual bag of needles from the system, and whispered to Bai Shan, "I'll put it away when I'm done using it. No one knows that every time I go to the doctor, I change this one." Needle bag. Man Bao took out the needle bag in the medicine box and put the needle bag from his sleeve into the medicine box. When he closed it, he realized that the medicine box was handed to her by Suyu today. Pack the needle bag and open it to see the needle inside. The light was dim, she couldn't see anything wrong. She couldn't help opening the needle bag, and pulled out needle by needle to check. Still didn't see anything wrong. Man Bao shrugged his nose, got close to the needle bag and smelled it carefully. He seemed to smell a faint medicinal smell. Sometimes, for the effect of acupuncture and moxibustion to be good, the needles are used with medicinal materials, so there will be some medicinal smells. But for the past 2 months, she hasn't used this packet of needles again, so why does it smell like medicine? Man Bao smelled it again and again, but couldn't help but called out Keek in his heart. Keek was actually checking when she pulled out the needle bag. At this time, after hearing her question, she said, "The 3rd, 4th, 6th, 7th, and 8th needles have been changed." Man Bao immediately took out the 3rd needle. These needles were commonly used, because the length was just right. She took it out and took a closer look. She didn't know if it was because of her psychology. She always felt that the needle was a little dark in color. Light problem. Bai Shan saw that she was serious, so he leaned in to look at it, and said after a while, "I don't see the difference. Is there something wrong with this needle?" Man Bao glanced at him, inserted the needle back, and said blankly, "It's right if you don't see it, because even someone like me who often uses needles can't see it very well." Keek said proudly, "I detected a lot of drug residues on it, but the specific ingredients have not been scanned, or did you pay points to entrust me with a more advanced scan?" Forget it. Man Bao rolled up the needle bag and thought, she knew that there was a problem. As for the problem, there were only dozens of medicines that could make the mother difficult to give birth, or affect the mother and child, so it was not difficult to figure out. Man Bao's eyes were cold, her consciousness sank into the system and gave Keek a part of the points, and said to him, "Start staring at Suyu now, and keep staring at the princess after she gave birth successfully." Keek responded, took the points and extended it to the room where Suyu lived in the Changguan pavilion, staring at her. Suyu had already washed up at this time, and just took off his coat and lay on the bed. She didn't know that there was a system staring at her in the dark. She stared at the tent above her head with her eyes open. After a long time, she closed her eyes and put her hands on her chest to sleep. As soon as Suyu woke up at dawn, there was no movement at all. Keek was bored to death, distracted, and Man Bao, who tossed and turned, couldn't sleep, said, "People are much calmer than you, and they didn't do anything all night, slept very well." Man Bao felt that her points were wasted. It's completely different from staring at the prince. When Keek stares at the prince, he basically gains something every day, and Man Bao also enjoys watching it, but Suyu is different. A total of points were given before and after Man Bao, and Keek stared at her 4 times, each time for no less than 3 days, but she couldn't stare at anything. What she should do every day, nothing unusual. Even Keek feels bored, let alone Manbao. Her time is so precious, how could she keep watching her videos? Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1718. Manbao was beaten by Keek, stayed silent for a while with his eyes open, and then got up. The palace maid lying on the table heard the movement and raised her head from the table, turned her head in a daze, and immediately woke up to come up to serve. Manbao waved his hand and let her go back to sleep. Last night, the crown princess was in intermittent labor pains, Manbao couldn't sleep well, and the maid who was waiting for her couldn't sleep well. Even the crown prince sleeping in the study was disturbed several times. The princess was quiet at this moment, and it was rare for everyone to close their eyes and take a rest. Manbao folded his hair and went out to fetch water with a wooden tub. The palace maid who was guarding outside saw that she had poured cold water, put her hands in the cold water, and gestured to her face, startled, "Dr. Zhou, you are." Manbao exhaled and said, "Sober up like this." Bai Shan also got up, stood under the porch and watched for a while, then stepped forward to look into her eyes curiously, "Is this because you didn't sleep well last night?" Seeing that he was in good spirits, Manbao exhaled and said, "You slept really well." While the two were talking, Imperial Physician Lu and Imperial Physician Zheng also got up. The three Imperial Physicians and Bai Shan, who had no task, had breakfast and then stood under the porch and looked at the dark sky. "It's going to snow." At the Taiji Hall, both the Emperor and the Queen sent people to ask questions. Aunt Chang also came over to see the princess on behalf of the Queen, and went back to report after confirming that she had not started giving birth. Even the Queen Mother sent someone. The prince didn't go anywhere early in the morning, just wandered in the yard. When the princess woke up and ate a bowl of noodles, she was able to walk around the corridor twice in a cloak, so she asked Zhou Man with round eyes, "What is this? Is it about to give birth?" Manbao said, "What's the hurry, walking more is good for production." He said that he was not in a hurry, and he was indeed a little afraid of giving birth, but there was no movement at all at this moment. Not only the prince, but even the concubine became anxious. "Why doesn't it hurt at all?" Manbao sat on a chair and took a sip of hot tea, then said slowly, "It's not yet time, don't worry, I won't give birth today, and the same will happen tomorrow." As soon as the words fell, the princess seemed to be kicked in the stomach, and then she felt a dampness. Her face was a little ugly. She looked at the palace maid who was supporting her, and said embarrassedly, I seem to be again, it's solved." Manbao held the teacup and blinked, feeling that something was wrong. "Didn't you just change?" She glanced at her lower body, put down the teacup, and said slowly, "It should be the amniotic fluid that broke, let's help you to the bed first." The crown princess froze all over, her hands and feet were a little weak. The maids didn't expect it to be so sudden, and they didn't dare to move for a while supporting the princess. On the other hand, Granny Wen and her aunts were still able to hold on, and they stepped forward to take the crown princess from the hand of the palace maid, almost half lifting the person onto the bed. Wen Po checked the crown princess and smiled, "I'm about to give birth, but the palace entrance is only open, don't worry, take your time." Manbao also glanced at it, then turned his head and said to the maids, "Let the kitchen boil water, bring some boiling water, redo the scissors that were ironed yesterday, and lay the clean cloth on it, everything taught you as before. Come." The palace maids also came to relax, and Aunt Yu, who was beside the crown princess, immediately came to take over the command, and everyone began to move in an orderly manner. Manbao and Wenpo removed most of the crown princess's clothes, then opened the medicine box. She glanced at the needle bag she put back in again, and after thinking about it, she didn't bother to replace it again. Instead, she closed the medicine box, took out the needle bag she had been keeping carefully from her sleeve and opened it. She said to the princess, who was already biting her lip to endure the pain, "I'll give you a needle to relieve the pain now, don't be afraid, besides me, there are imperial physicians Lu and imperial physicians Zheng outside. The crown princess nodded again and again, as if she was really not afraid, but the woman who had been paying attention to the palace mouth shook her head slightly to Zhou Man, and Man Bao knew that she was afraid of the palace mouth shrinking. Man Bao didn't speak, but pinched the needle to puncture her. The crown princess gradually sweated on her forehead, and couldn't help but let out a small voice, but she was not as flustered as yesterday. She remembered what Zhou Man had taught her before, not to shout loudly, it would lose a lot of strength, so she had to try her best to be calm, listen to the mother-in-law. Man Bao kept acupuncture on her body. After about a quarter of an hour, the crown princess felt less pain, and she gradually accepted the continuous pain and became less nervous. After this relaxation, the cervix slowly opened. Seeing that, the mothers quietly breathed a sigh of relief, shook their head slightly at Aunt Yu, and whispered, "You don't need to boil the medicine for induction of labor, just boil the medicine to protect the miscarriage. The stable mother that the crown princess uses now is the best in the palace. The queens and concubines in the palace are basically the ones who deliver their children. And you can trust their abilities," but she still turned to look at Zhou. After a full glance, she nodded slightly when she saw her, and she went down to give instructions. Man Bao kept turning the needle in his hand and asked the crown princess, seeing that she was not in so much pain, he put away the needle, and then looked at Granny Wen. Granny Wen nodded slightly, and then said, "It's driving very fast, there are 3 fingers." So a group of people sat in front of the bed and watched the princess, waiting for her palace to open. Although the acupuncture didn't hurt so much, the crown princess still felt like she was living like a year. Seeing that they didn't respond for a while, she asked, "Has it not started yet?" The wives turned their heads to look at Man Bao, who could only explain, "Niang Niang, there is no urgency, you are the first child, the opening of the cervix must be slow, now with 3 fingers, if it is fast, it will take about half an hour, there are 2 or 3 hours of slowing down." The crown princess didn't dare to turn, so she just lay on the bed and waited. After waiting for a while, she couldn't help but ask, "I don't feel that pain now, will it hurt too much when I'm about to give birth?" "Don't worry, I'll give you a quarter-hour painkiller every 2/4 of an hour, but it does get worse as you go back." After thinking about it, Man Bao stretched out his hand to hold her and comforted her, "It'll be all right, so many of us are here." Granny Wen hurriedly said with a smile, "Yes, don't worry, Imperial Physician Zhou Xiao gave you an induction injection just now, and the cervix opened so quickly, otherwise you would have to drink oxytocin. You should see Imperial Physician Zhou Xiao. With all your heart, what are you afraid of?" Hearing this, the crown princess felt even more relieved. As soon as she relaxed, the cervix opened faster. Man Bao pierced the needle twice, and the cervix opened to the 9 fingers. Man Bao and Wen Po immediately got up and washed their hands with hot water, shook the water and waited for the hands to dry slowly, and the cervix was fully opened. 2 stable wives, one Man Bao stood apart, one comforted the crown princess, letting her breathe slowly and holding her breath, the other was touching the fetal position, and Man Bao was standing below and watching. "Okay, Niang Niang, your cervix is well opened and the fetal position is correct. As long as you use the right strength, the child will be born soon. Come on, follow the servants to inhale, exhale, and take a big breath. Okay, use force. Go down hard, sink hard. See you at 9. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1719. The Crown Princess once rehearsed with Man Bao, she sank hard, the pain weakened by Zhou Man's needle seemed to come at once, and she couldn't help crying out in pain. Seeing the contraction of the cervix, Man Bao said to the Crown Princess, "Relax, relax, take a deep breath first, yes, that's it, hold your breath, and then work hard. After going back and forth a few times, the crown princess couldn't help shaking her head and shouted, "It hurts, it hurts." Manbao reached out and touched her belly and said, "This has weakened the pain, madam, you can't get a needle now, you have to carry it yourself, other women have more pain than you in childbirth, they can, you can too, it's definitely possible, think about His Royal Highness, think about this child you've been looking forward to for many years." When Po said, "This is useless, think about it again, how to use it, come, let's bend her legs a little more." Manbao and another woman went to help the crown princess adjust her movements, "Come on, let's do it again, inhale, exhale slowly, inhale again, work hard." Manbao, "Yes, this time the strength is right, this is the feeling, come again." Seeing the child's head, the mother-in-law comes again, "Come, let's inhale." The prince lay on the window and listened. Hearing the prince's screams, he couldn't help walking back and forth in the yard. After turning around a few times, he turned his head and asked Imperial Physician Lu, "Why so slow?" Imperial Physician Lu looked up at the sky and said, "Your Highness, this is almost too soon. We originally thought we would not be able to give birth until the afternoon. Who would have known that the palace mouth of the crown princess opened quite fast, and she didn't even drink the induction medicine. It must be Zhou Man who gave the crown princess an injection." In the room, Po Wen and Manbao were encouraging the crown princess. Hearing that the child's head was about to come out, the crown princess took a deep breath, held it back, and tried again. Manbao's eyes brightened, he carefully dragged the child's head, and gently pulled the child out with his hands to urinate. A steady woman glanced at it and said loudly, I was born, you are born, madam." Manbao held the child's small head in one hand and his little butt in the other, when Po quickly cut the umbilical cord and tied the knot. Neither of them had time to check the child's mouth and nose for filth, because it was suddenly exposed to the air. The cold child opened his mouth and cried. The cry was loud, and Po Wen said happily, "Little Huang soon is healthy, how loud is this cry?" Said so, but Manbao and her were not slow, and they didn't dare to let him be so cold, so they immediately put them in warm water to wash. Manbao gently washed his body with an old cotton handkerchief, then dried it and put it in the swaddling clothes that had been prepared earlier. Manbao wrapped the child up, while Po Wen and Aunt Yu were still taking care of the aftermath, stopping the bleeding and dealing with the dirt under the princess. Manbao hugged the swaddling clothes and stepped forward, and said to the somewhat collapsed crown princess, "Look, it's a boy." Manbao let her take a look at the child's face, then lifted the swaddle to show her the child's little Gigi, and then wrapped it up and handed it to Aunt Yu. "I'll do the rest, and you can announce the good news to His Highness." Aunt Yu breathed a sigh of relief, because the prince had already asked several times at the door because he heard the cry of the child, and the palace maid had already gone to answer, but the prince still lay at the door and refused to leave. Manbao cleaned his hands, felt the pulse of the crown princess, and said to her, "The delivery went well, congratulations to the empress." The princess sighed in relief. However, Manbao still gave her a set of needles to stop the bleeding and reduce the pain. After the mother-in-law and the palace maids had changed the crown princess clean bed and clothes, she slowed down, turned her head and asked, "Why hasn't the child been brought back since he was carried out?" The palace maid bowed and said, "The little emperor's grandson is in the side hall now. His Royal Highness is watching. His Majesty and the Empress have sent Master Gu and Aunt Chang to come to see the little emperor's grandson." The crown princess looked at Manbao, grabbed her hand and said, "Help me go see the child." Manbao knew what she was worried about, smiled, and turned around to go out. As soon as he opened the curtain, Manbao was stunned. The outside was covered in silver, and there were big snowflakes flying in the sky. She couldn't help but stand for a while, turned her head and asked the maid who was standing beside her, "When did it snow?" It's been down for an hour. Man Bao frowned and glanced at the side hall connected to the main hall. Even though there was a corridor, it was still very cold. It's so cold, why did you take the child out? The palace maid lowered her head and said in a low voice, Your Majesty asks Xiao Yuanzheng to come to see the little prince. This is the delivery room, so we can only move it to the side hall first. The emperor sent Xiao Yuanzheng to come here to know the child's health and treatment as soon as possible. After all, the crown prince had many disasters before. Although Zhou Man said that the disease was cured, it is always good to be cautious. When Man Bao arrived at the side hall, Xiao Yuanzheng and imperial physician Lu had just taken turns to see the little emperor's grandson, saying that he was healthy. The prince held the child stiffly in both hands, and did not even dare to speak too loudly. He nodded again and again, just be healthy, be healthy. After seeing the child, Gu Zhong and Aunt Chang wanted to return to his life. Seeing Man Bao came out with blood on his body, he stood up a little and nodded and smiled at her. The imperial physician Zhou has worked hard. Man Bao smiled and said, It's not hard. She entered the side hall, looked at the child in the prince's arms, and then looked at Xiao Yuanzheng. Xiao Yuanzheng stroked his beard and said with a smile, The little emperor is very healthy. He asked, Where is the crown princess? The princess is also safe. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief, so everyone was satisfied. Man Bao glanced at Bai Shan over the prince, nodded slightly at him, and went down to change her clothes. Her clothes were stained with blood. After she changed her clothes, the crown prince had asked Aunt Yu to take the child to the crown princess to see. He was sitting on a chair and drinking tea with satisfaction. When he saw Zhou Man, he smiled and waved, Come here. Full treasure to go. The prince rolled up his sleeves and stretched out his hand to show her, Let me see if Gu can make other concubines pregnant recently. Man Bao, the crown princess just gave birth to a child. However, she still stretched out her hand to give the prince a pulse, and then praised him, His Royal Highness is well maintained, you can have sex, but you should still take care of your body, and don't do it too often. The prince put down his sleeves and said, I know, right, Bai Shan said that your needle bag has been moved. Man Bao paused and nodded, then got up and went out to get the medicine box and opened it to His Royal Highness to see the needle bag she had been subjected to. The prince's eyes turned cold and he asked, What's wrong with this needle? It should have been soaked in medicinal materials, but I don't know what kind of medicine it is. Man Bao paused and said, I don't know who it is, but I know my needle bag. I used it once before, and then I used it often a cover-up, but never use it. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1720. The prince stretched out his hand, and Man Bao put the needle bag in his hand. The prince lowered his eyes and looked at it for a while, and said, I know you don't know who you are, but you must have someone who is suspicious. Tell me, who is it? After hesitating for a while, Man Bao asked, Your Highness, there is no evidence, it's just suspicion. You will use the punishment. The prince looked at her angrily and said, If you don't talk about people who are suspicious, then the entire East Palace, especially the people in Chongguan Pavilion, whether they are servants, palace maids, or waiters or editors, have the possibility to come into contact with your medicine cabinet. Everyone will be interrogated, oh, including Bai Shan and Bai Cheng. Man Bao immediately said, We suspected that Su Yu, who was serving by my side, was here, but I quietly stared at her for a long time and didn't see anything. The prince glanced at her up and down, and said with contempt, Don't you startle the snake. Impossible, Man Bao said confidently, I won't be afraid of any snakes. She wasn't staring by herself, she was staring at Keek's help. The prince looked at the needle bag in his hand and said, If it's her, you can find out if you grab it and ask. Seeing Zhou Man's bitter face, he said, Don't worry, Gu won't punish her severely. In the end, if it wasn't for her, I would reward her as a female official. Manbao breathed a sigh of relief, stood up and said, Your Highness, shall I go home? The prince lifted his eyelids and glanced at her. It's getting dark now, so let's stay in the East Palace for another day, and Ming Ergu will have someone send you and Bai Shan back. Manbao turned to look out the window. At this time, the snow was still falling, and it seemed that the sky and the earth were very bright, which did not affect her going home at all. But looking back at the prince, seeing that he had already picked up the teacup to drink tea, he sighed and quietly retired. She knew that they just wanted her to look at the crown princess and the little grandson. Before nightfall, the little grandson woke up and ate his first milk. The princess saw that he would eat milk after only a few strokes. She was so happy that she thought the child was very smart. When the little grandson was full, Aunt Yu wrapped the child, took it from the nurse, and put it on the side of the crown princess. Zhou Ziotai said that when the child is just born, it needs to be closer to the mother, so that the child will have a sense of security, less fear, and can grow faster. The princess didn't know if the child felt safe. Anyway, she felt safe looking at the child beside her, so her eyelids became heavier and heavier, but she fell asleep after a while. She was tormented by labor pains last night, and she hadn't slept much at first. Today, after another day of tossing, she was even more tired, so she fell asleep quickly now. Manbao looked at it, and then swept the room. Seeing that there were all trusted people around the crown princess, she went out to the corridor. Bai Shanzhen was standing under the porch watching the snow. He turned around when he heard the footsteps. He smiled and said, It's hard to see such heavy snow. Manbao nodded. Although the air was a little cold after the snow, he felt fresher. His Royal Highness took the needle bag away. Bai Shan nodded, turned around and continued to watch the unstoppable snow. I didn't say it before because I wasn't sure, and the needles that have been moved are fine, so it's not good to make a big effort to investigate. Since this time the fox's tail is exposed, naturally, it is necessary to seize it. Only to catch a thief for 1,000 miles, there is no reason to prevent a thief for 1,000 days. Manbao said, although I doubt it, it may not be her. Because Keek said that from this morning to the present, Suyu has not been abnormal. Even if the princess has given birth to a child safely, it is well known in the palace, she is not abnormal. Maybe there is. Manbao just watched a small clip specially intercepted by Keek. She and the other palace maids received the reward from Dong Gong and stood under the corridor and looked at the sky for about a quarter of an hour. But no one could say whether she was in a daze or enjoying the snow. For example, Manbao and Bai Shan now, aren't they standing here watching the falling snowflakes? Bai Shan was much more decisive than Zhou Man. He said, she is just a little palace maid, and she can give you an unfathomable feeling. I am more inclined to be her. Manbao, sometimes you have to believe in yourself. Intuition. Manbao did not speak. The two stood under the porch and the wind was blowing for a while. The sky gradually darkened, but the snow seemed to be getting bigger and bigger. She stretched out her hand, and a snowflake fell on her palm. It blew out of the palm of his hand, and then smiled. Look, the snowflakes will fall to the ground. It seems that the ending is already predetermined. Bai Shan also laughed. You can think about it? Manbao reached out to catch more snowflakes, and then scatter them. He also reached out to disrupt the snowflakes that fell in the air. He sighed, it's a pity for the roasted venison in the horse farm in the western suburbs. Bai Shan smiled and narrowed his eyes. When I leave the palace tomorrow, I will send someone to fetch a piece of venison, and we will roast it in the garden ourselves. Okay. In the side hall not far away, the prince withdrew his gaze from the window and said to Eunuch Wu, send the person to the Department of Penalty and Punishment overnight, and save her life before asking. Eunuch Wu responded in a low voice, then bowed and walked out. When Manbao returned to the ear room that was cleaned up for her, Keek told Man Bao, Suyu has been arrested. Keek took out that section and showed it to Man Bao, and she saw Suyu was pulled away by the two servants with a panicked face, and his face was full of fear. I don't know what mistake the servant made. She also saw that eunuch Wu led someone to search Suyu's room, but found nothing. Watching her being dragged all the way to the Department of Penalties, Man Bao frowned and said, "Don't stare anymore." Keek didn't want to stare either, it wasn't interested in exploring the torture system of this world at all. Man Bao tossed and turned for another night, got up the next day to see the little emperor and the princess, and left when he confirmed that the mother and son were in good condition. She thought of something and turned around and said, "Niang Niang, don't use cold water for the child when washing the third, use warm water. The two ladies are very experienced. When you give the reward, give them more generously, so that they will move faster." The crown princess didn't understand the meaning of the words for a while, but Aunt Yu thought of something, and smiled with Man Bao, "Thank you Miss Zhou for reminding me, if you don't tell me, we almost forgot about this soap." They delivered the little grandson, "This is a great merit, and naturally it will be rewarded generously." Man Bao was relieved, nodded, and left. The crown princess thought of something, and immediately said, "Tomorrow, 11 San, you have to come and have a look." Man Bao thought about it for a while, and nodded in agreement. He decided to go back and get a longevity lock, and bring it to the little grandson tomorrow. The prince did what he said, and as expected, he sent Zhou Man and Bai Shan back, and there were a lot of gifts to go back together. This time, the prince had crossed the bright road and had the servants and guards send it directly. Old Zhutu stood in the yard wearing a fox fur coat and watched people move things into the house. He couldn't help rubbing his palms. He wanted to help, but he couldn't seem to help. See you tomorrow.